Supreme Court Roe v. Wade overturned MEGATHREAD. Giving this space to try to avoid swamping of the front page. Sort suggestion set to new to try and encourage discussion. Edit. Temporarily removing this as a pinned post, as we can only pin 2. We'll reinstate this shortly. Conversation should still be being directed here and it is still appropriate to continue posting here. So separation of church and state just doesn't fucking exist anymore? This shouldn't have been with the Supreme Court in the first place. As well as marriage rights. National legislation should have been passed decades ago by any number of administrations, but didn't. Time to start demanding our legislators legislate again. Fuck everyone who thought we were overreacting when HRC lost. Fuck everyone who thought former guy wouldn't be that bad. Fuck everyone who thought that the Supreme Court wouldn't overturn Roe. And to all the folks who just didn't like Hillary, I hope you're fucking happy. Fuck all of them. I don't even have a uterus anymore, but I am pissed off on behalf of my sisters for whom pregnancy is a possibility. And I have no doubt they'll come for contraception and marriage equality. I'm really sick about this right now. 5 justices just voted to ignore 50 years of legal precedent, strip the right to control their own bodies from half the U.S. population, and in the process undermine the basic constitutional rights of every America. If you think this doesn't matter to you because you aren't a woman or you aren't likely to get an abortion, consider that a court which can arbitrarily take away one constitutional right can arbitrarily take away another. Remember also that of the 5 justices who authored this disgrace, 1 holds a stolen seat, 2 are credibly accused of sexual assault, most or all likely perjured themselves on this very subject to gain their seat, and 1 is likely complicit in an attempt to overthrow the government of the United States. This is the darkest and most shameful day for the court since the Dred Scott decision. The court has lost all legitimacy. And any American woman attempting to leave the country should be automatically eligible for refugee status. Are hormonal implants at risk? I'm on Nexplanon, which has stopped my periods completely, and I really don't want to give up the first birth control that has helped my painful periods. I live in Ohio, so I'm prepared to hear the worst. Thomas's concurring opinion includes suggesting overturning the case that protects the right to birth control, so yes, you're in danger. I just want to get ahead of people who are inevitably going to spew frustration at both parties by saying that this is not a 2-party issue. This is uniquely a failing of the Republican Party. 6 Republican-appointed justices voted against 3 Democratic-appointed justices after being nominated to the Supreme Court by Republicans who promised to have Roe v. Wade overturned. Maybe you wish that Democrats passed a law to prevent this or something, but that's still not the same as explicitly appointing 6 judges with the intention of dismantling the law. This was a deliberate choice by one party against the values of the other, regardless of whatever criticisms or hatred you have for the Democrats. What's going on with so many folks being caught lying under oath on video, with no repercussions? Does this mean perjury no longer needs to be enforced across the board? As an outsider looking in, America is so fucked now. World's superpower and land of the free my ass. Reminder that you're not pro-life, you're pro-birth. Pro-forced birth. I am already scared, but as a gay person, I'm extra scared of what's next. I keep seeing people say Dems should work to codify abortion rights nationwide and that reps to outlaw abortion nationwide. Does this ruling say that the federal gov doesn't have the power to regulate abortion, so it goes to the states? So by this logic any federal legislation regulating abortion would be unconstitutional? No, the ruling more so says there isn't an inherent right to abortions in the Constitution. Therefore it should be left up to the individual states. It does not say the federal government cannot regulate abortion, that would be another court challenge. The federal government has not passed any laws on abortion, so it hasn't tried to regulate it yet. The only federal protection that existed was through Roe. Fuck conservatives. You regressive and oppressive pieces of shit. People will literally die and you simple don't care. Fuck you. Fuick you. Fuick you all. Can someone explain me exactly why it was overturned? In media and social media I see everyone seems unhappy about it, and somewhere I read this was applied 20 years ago. Then why Supreme Court suddenly intervened and overturned it? P.S. I am not from US, so not much aware about it. The Supreme Court gave the states the right to choose how they set laws for abortion. You can think of slavery before the Civil War. States were choosing if slavery was legal. I'm no expert, just a random person with a history degree who's upset that we are all still arguing amongst each other. Edit. For example, there were roughly 10 to 12 states that had trigger laws outlawing abortion go through right as it was decided in by the Supreme Court. It was overturned, being federally protected. It is now up to the individual states to rule. This is a bit complicated, but hopefully the below explains it well. How the Supreme Court works. The Supreme Court doesn't intervene. Typically, a law is passed and enforced. The defendant feels that the law is unconstitutional. Basically, the Constitution says laws like that aren't allowed, and takes it to court. In some cases, usually if the case is controversial and significant, it gets appealed and eventually taken up by the Supreme Court so they can give the final say. That final say is in a document called an opinion, which doesn't just say whether or not they think the law is constitutional, but why. That reasoning helps to establish what the actual limits are of what they believe isn't constitutional. If the justices have different reasonings, they can release separate opinions. The precedent is based on what the majority said. Note: if no relevant law ever gets challenged, the court can't ever overturn, expand on precedent. Court's earlier rulings on the issue. In 1973, the Supreme Court took up the case Roe v. Wade and established precedent that abortion was a right guaranteed by the Constitution. Again, they didn't do anything to the Constitution. The court had, in earlier cases, inferred a right to privacy in the Constitution based on the 9th, 14th Amendments, and that banning abortion outright was an infringement of this right. They also said this right wasn't absolute and outlined a system that established what sorts of restrictions were permissible. Vaguely, you have to allow early-term abortions but not late-term abortions. This general reasoning was reaffirmed in the 1992 case Planned Parenthood v. Casey, but with some revisions to that system. How this case happened. Now, in 2018, Mississippi passed a law that clearly violated this precedent. This was not a coincidence or an accident. They thought there was a good chance that the Supreme Court would allow for stricter regulations on abortion than what those cases allowed, and passing a law like this was the best way for them to end up with a court case that could make its way up to the Supreme Court. What the court actually said. The 6 justices who said it was constitutional were split. 5 justices basically said that abortion is not protected in the Constitution at all. So not only was this law legal, but even stricter abortion bans would also be legal. They basically just said that they thought previous rulings were wrong, and that the amendments that they used to justify their ruling did not actually imply a right to abortion because it isn't rooted in the foundations of our nation or liberty in general. Thomas and Kavanaugh both added on to this with their own documents. Thomas to say he thought even more rights, like contraception, weren't guaranteed in the Constitution, and Kavanaugh to expand on some of the things pertaining to abortion that he said were still unconstitutional, e.g., traveling across states for an abortion. A 6th justice, Roberts, said that the law was constitutional but did not say that Roe should be fully overturned, though he wasn't very explicit on exactly where the line was. The 3 justices who said the law was unconstitutional generally implied that the Roe and Casey decisions were sound. Yes, you're right. I should have been forced to scramble my DNA and thus entwine the rest of my life with an emotionally abusive idiot while I was still in high school after not one but 2 methods of contraception failed. My dreams of college, since attained, a career, since attained, and a loving, caring life partner, since very much attached, should have mattered less than the number of cells I could scrape under my fingernails. What's more, yes, I absolutely should have been forced to give birth to an unexpected but then very much wanted daughter when I found out that she had little to no chance of surviving outside the womb without a short lifetime full of pain. Yes, to clarify, late-term aborter here. I couldn't care less what anyone feels on the subject. It was heart-wrenching, horrible, one of the most painful experiences of a life not lacking in pain, and I wouldn't do anything differently for her or for me. Fuck anyone who is happy about today's news in any way, shape, or form. And no, fellas, today is not for pointing out what Democrats have done wrong to get us here. Today is for standing the fuck back, and standing the fuck with every single childbearing able person in this country who is hurting and wants to set everything on fire. I love you all and I'm hurting with and for you. Can you order abortion pills online to Oklahoma? Yes, but there is a chance you could be prosecuted for doing so. Question. Non-US person here. I understand Roe v. Wade is a big deal. What is stopping the Supreme Court from overturning all the other big deal cases? And won't this just mean that eventually, as your two parties take turns stacking the SCOTUS to their side, that all the big deal cases that interfere with the politics of either side will get overturned? What is stopping the Supreme Court from overturning all the other big deal cases? Nothing. It was understood that traditionally, only future Supreme Court rulings could overturn past Supreme Court rulings. It was supposed to be rare because the U.S. system was based on the English ideas of common law and precedents. This basically fucks all trust in the past and future. It's chaos now. Same thing with court stacking. We have 9 because it was understood that attempts by past presidents and Congresses to change the number causes the system to be unstable. Now, there is no reason not to hold back, not tradition, not rational choice to preserve personal freedom. I can't even express how angry I am about this. It's 2022. Why the fuck is America going backwards? The country where residents claims it's the best in the world. It's looking a hell of a lot more like a third world country these days. Do men even begin to comprehend how dehumanizing this is? A rapist and their unborn child are more protected than the victim who is traumatized and whose life will be ruined. Fuck America. They're not even true conservatives at this point. True conservatives believe that there should be no political governance over medications people take or the procedures that someone may or may not choose to get. What happened to separation of the church and state? I'll say it once and I'll say it again. This is a fucking war on women. This is a war on equal marriage rights. This is a war on contraception. This is a war. Fuck the states. Fuck these people who think it's okay to put bans on people's bodies. Fuck all of this.